Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of thechangeleader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at thechangeleader.com. This episode of Changing Higher Ed is sponsored by Perdea Education, a national leader in online student recruitment and enrollment services, providing institutions enrolled students risk-free on a performance-based model with no long-term contract. If your online programs could benefit from incremental online student enrollments, visit PerdeaEducation.com. That's P-E-R-D-I-A education.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Our guest today is Dr. Ted Mitchell, President of the American Council of Education. Ted brings a wide array of experience and accomplishments to ACE, as well as a long-standing focus on helping more students gain access to a post-secondary education and complete their degrees. He jokingly says he can't hold a job, but those of us who know Ted know that isn't true. His background is broad because he's willing to serve where he's needed. That list is long and includes President of Occidental College, Undersecretary of Education for Post-Secondary Education Policies and Programs for the Obama Administration, Vice Chancellor and Dean of Graduate School of Education and Information Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles, and Professor and Chair of the Education Department at Dartmouth College. I could go on and on about Ted's background and accomplishment, but needless to say, he can hold a job and is a very highly valued higher education team member. Ted, welcome to the program. Great to have you here.
Well, thank you. I'm really pleased to be here. Thanks for making time for me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And on behalf of the audience, I know we're really looking forward to the conversation today. A lot of changes. Trump administration is gone. We've got a new secretary that's been named and going through the confirmation process. What can we expect going forward?
You know, I think you're right. Change is in the air. The first thing for Team Biden seems to be to go back and unravel some of the things that the Trump administration put in place. I think day one, we got stronger footing for DACA, for the Dreamers who are in America's colleges or universities and our military serving as teachers. I think further reform on immigration is coming down the pipe. That will make room for more international students. I think that's good for everybody. And I think it's only begun. We'll see some more regulatory changes. I know you and I have talked about some of those. We'll see some changes, I hope, in the funding streams available to higher ed. But for right now, I think the team is focused mostly on coronavirus relief.
So let's jump into that. What's that? What do you think that's going to look like going forward, the corona relief? I know they're talking about some big bucks going to higher ed and also to the states, which certainly should help higher ed in that way.
I think that's exactly right. And it's important to think of those two things together because a large portion of the money that's available to state institutions of higher education comes through the states. And states are not doing real well right now. They're having to put out a ton of money, appropriately so, on the whole gamut of healthcare, whether that's testing and PPE, essential worker support. That's a big load for states to bear. Higher education has its own concerns having to do with PPE for their faculty, staff, and students, having to do with increasing testing regimen, moving instruction online, and thinning out the residences, if not closing them altogether. So there's a lot of relief that needs to happen. We're pleased that under Trump, there were dollars made available to higher education. We're pleased that the COVID-19 relief fund that the Biden team has proposed aims about $40 billion to higher education, and as you mentioned, even more to states and local governments.
Well, that $40 billion is a big number. It's not nearly as big as some people have advocated for.
No, that's right. And I think we're pretty close to first in line in advocating for more. As you know, we represent all higher education, the 2-year, the 4-year, the public, the private, across the country. And we did a survey of our members, just looking at the money that they have been spending up to this point. And we think that the money that's really needed to make higher education not even whole, but bring us back into the game is about $100 billion. So we're grateful for the 40. We'll certainly put the 40 to great use, but there will be expenses that last and debts that will need to be paid far into the future.
Well, that is certainly it's good that the money is coming. It's a lot better than just a poke in the eye.
It sure is. It sure is.
But this could exacerbate the critical finances that so many colleges and universities have out there. I mean, I've read where at least 75% of the CFOs out there are quite concerned about their budgets and their finances.
Yeah, and they have been and they are. We do a monthly survey of those CFOs' bosses, their presidents, and we ask them and have asked them now throughout the pandemic what their top concerns are. I think importantly, their number one concern is the physical safety of their communities. Number two is always the mental health of their communities. And right up there at number three is the money to pay for all of this in the short and the long run. So if the financial stability of our institutions remains tenuous, and the longer we keep campuses closed or semi-closed, the longer that crisis is going to continue.
It certainly is. One of the big challenges, of course, is those finances. This is going to impact multiple areas. It was interesting to hear you talk about, though, that second one, that mental health of the communities. We're seeing far more emphasis on that type of thing because of COVID.
We sure are. COVID has put stresses on professionals in ways that we haven't seen in quite a long time. I think all of us who are sort of sequestered with our families at home know the intricate and complicated dance that takes place for everybody to be doing what they need to be doing. And, we have seen a disproportionate negative impact on the working lives and the mental health of women in America. Women have withdrawn from the workforce in order to do even more lifting in their families. For some women who are single moms, that's been even more detrimental to their ability to participate in the labor force, and it's had an amazing impact on the stress that all of us feel. In the case of students, for 21, 22-year-olds to suddenly be tossed back into their families of origin, their homes of origin, whether those are affluent or more struggling families, doesn't matter. It's still a tough row to hoe.
It is. And I know that there are universities and colleges out there that are doing just a really good job with this. Recently had Tom Mars from Texas A&M's Mays Center for Executive Development on, talked about this very thing. It's just amazing the stressors that are going on with all this.
Tom's doing a great job. Texas A&M is really a leader in this work. And, they kind of hold down the fort at the far end of the really big institutions that are taking this seriously. But whether you're Texas A&M or Paul Quinn College or Benedict College, smaller colleges, they have really bent over backwards to make their campuses available to students who need the safety of a campus to ride out the pandemic. And they have made their mental health resources available 24/7.
Yeah. Another plug for one of my guests, Russell Lowry Hart at Amarillo College. He was on the show talking about how he's out there taking students' temperatures. They've opened up the computer rooms for them because their demographic really is lower income folks who may not be able to afford Wi-Fi at their homes. So they kept things open, computer rooms, etc., so students could continue with their education.
Absolutely. And I think when the story of this pandemic is told, we will find heroes in sort of big type and small type as we go through this. But I have never been more impressed, more humbled, prouder of higher education than I have been over the last year, to watch the things that people do without looking for kudos, without even knowing where the resources are to be able to support it. And it's been a remarkable statement about the willingness of this sector to reach out and be all about students and student growth.
It's almost as though, and here, you didn't ask, but here's a suggestion. Maybe ACE needs to put up a heroes page on its website to give recognition to some of these folks who are going above and beyond.
It's a great idea. We started to put together a draft of that, and we found that we just couldn't keep pace. So, we'll call out individuals every once in a while, but the last thing we want to do is we don't want to leave people unrecognized if there's a list and they're not on it. But it's a great thought. And I would hope, honestly, that all of our institutions do that.
Yes.
And, for Amarillo College or, St. Philip's, the westernmost HBCU in the country, community college in Texas, for them to do that, and for Harvard to do that, and Cal State, and they know more and they know better who on the ground is really, really taking the weight on this.
Well, a heroes page at any university or all universities, what a way to go.
Wouldn't it be great? So thanks. Yeah. The idea was yours. It started here. So thanks.
Oh no, I think you already said you already started a draft of it already. So, but
then we didn't have the good idea. So that's good.
Well, so back to the Biden policies.
Yeah,
we're seeing some changes already. What do you think? Where are they going?
I think the team was very clear about where it wanted to go during the campaign, and they're beginning to follow through. We talked a little bit about DACA and Dreamers. I think that there is a bucket of initiatives that we are seeing them work through around student access, about affordability, and about equity. And I think that the DACA work is a part of that. The administration, before it came in, talked about doubling the Pell Grant, making it possible for even more low-income students to see their way to higher education by lowering the cost with a Pell Grant. I think we can see action on that front. We've heard a lot about free college, again, a major access initiative. And Dr. Biden, the First Lady, came out just again last week saying that she supports free community college for all. I think that these two proposals go together. If you double Pell, because of the low cost of community college already, you essentially make community college free. So I think that these two things can go hand in hand. We've heard about potential debt relief for students who and their families who have borrowed money in the past. We think that debt relief is appropriate in many instances. There are many people, and the pandemic has exacerbated it. There are many people who are in economic trouble for whom relief from an unpaid student loan could be very helpful. Let's remember that the majority of people who default on their student loans share two characteristics. One, they never graduated from college. And two, they owe less than $10,000. And so I think if we think about a means test for student loan relief, we can take care of a lot of pain for a lot of people without the moral hazard of just kind of giving away free money to people who may not need it.
As the saying goes, the most expensive college degree is the one that you don't get.
The one you don't get. Isn't that true? 40% of defaulted loan borrowers did not complete their degree, which leads to another part of the Biden agenda, which is transparency and accountability for our institutions. And I know that people oftentimes think that that's not something higher education is interested in, but we're very interested in it. We're committed not only to admitting students to our programs, but getting them through. So the shorthand for that for all of us is to and through. And we want to be sure that we're working just as hard on the through part as we are on the to part. So, what are graduation rates like for people who look like me? How long does it really take to get through a program? What kind of income should I be looking at when I finish my degree? Those are all measures that we can collect rather easily and that should be available to students as they approach college.
What kind of metrics do you see them coming up with at the department?
Yep. So there was a regulation during our time
Gainful
known as
employment.
the Gainful Employment Rule.
Yes.
Exactly. You got it on the nose.
Yeah.
And the Gainful Employment Rule, and this was not just a department regulation, but it is a statute, says that career colleges should provide students with an education that allows them to pay back their loans. And so a ratio of income to student loan balances is one of the ways in which the department was able to calculate that. Mm-hmm. The Trump administration didn't like that, so they essentially put a hold on the gainful employment regulation, but I think it's on its way back. And once again, those of us in higher education support it coming back because we think that, yes, paying for a college degree should mean a step up in the income ladder. And if it isn't, then we've got something to worry about inside our own house.
And, I did have a conversation a couple of years ago with Diane Howard-Jones, and she and I spoke about the college scorecard, and she wanted to do some changes to that to make it more viable and more applicable. Have you heard anything about that?
I certainly talked with Secretary Jones when she was in place. As you know, the college scorecard was President Obama very, very personally very interested in the college scorecard, and that was built at his behest. And it does provide the beginnings of the kind of information that we're talking about. The Trump administration wanted to add program-level information. Knowing that you graduated from Penn State is one thing, and figuring out the average income of a Penn State graduate is interesting and important. But it's a big difference in the earnings rate of a Penn State graduate in electrical engineering and a Penn State graduate in, say, studio art. Not to say that one is better than the other, but students should be able to see what the difference is. And it's one of the places where I think the Trump administration and the Biden administration will come to agreement that more data is usually better, particularly in an environment where students have such broad ranges of choice in colleges and universities.
They'll also need to be able to get data from different places and different databases, which I know was part of the challenge that Secretary Jones had when she was there, was not able to pull in the data due to privacy and other regulations.
Yeah, the federal government works well in some regards and not so well in others. And the silos that have been constructed over generations between, say, the IRS, the Department of Education, make for some tough negotiations. But I get it. It's important. I don't want people looking around in my IRS files for no reason. But there are ways to create safeguards, guardrails, firewalls that will make it possible for better and easier data transfer.
I think you're right. We've talked about free college, debt relief, DACA, affordability, equity. Where do you see the administration going with equity?
I think a lot of it will have to do with, as we have done, I think rather effectively in K-12, making sure that we're disaggregating numbers. So, for example, the UCLA graduation rate is a identifiable number, but being able to measure the UCLA graduation rate by race, by ethnicity, by income group will help us ensure that, as I was saying earlier, we're not just diversifying the freshman class, we're making sure that people get through in an equitable basis. So that's one. Second is, and you and I have talked about this before, one of the things that we forget is that higher education is itself becoming much more diverse. No longer is the average high school student an 18-year-old who gets dropped off by mom and dad in the minivan and then 4 years later is picked up with a diploma in hand. The average college student today is 26. Majority of college students are in community college, and many of them are single moms. They are returning veterans. They are folks looking to retrain, and man, do we need more of that with an economy that's changing the way ours is. So equity doesn't just mean more black and brown and poor people getting through the traditional system. It means opening the system up wider to more people who bring a different background than the traditional high school-aged student. That then leads to some important changes that we'll need to make in things like the Pell Grant and the student loan program to make those programs better able to serve the needs of students who aren't in a traditional residential time-bound program.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I really resonate with, I saw a story on CNN or someone, it was a couple of years ago, talking about job retraining. And it was a story out of Sweden or Norway. And the people there, one of the men that was interviewed says, I love it when I'm laid off because I get trained on new skills and I can always come back and get a higher paying job. I don't see that here in the US. And I'm just wondering, how does that happen, or can it?
Yeah, I think it can and it does, but it doesn't happen uniformly across the U.S. It doesn't even happen uniformly in states. We don't have a really robust retraining program. Again, there are a few dollars here and there. The Labor Department has some money, Commerce has some money, Education has some money to provide for job training centers in communities. But it's not the same thing as many European countries have, where if you step off the employment track, you automatically step into the retraining track, and you get put on a path to different skills and employment. And I think when you look at the Biden administration's proposals around the importance of community colleges, for example, that's where they're headed. That's where they're edging. And I think it's entirely appropriate for us to be making major investments at this intersection between job training and higher education.
And it makes perfect sense, especially with the free community college. People who are laid off, whose income has been hurt at some degree. Yes, there is somewhat of a safety net out there with unemployment, et cetera, but if you've got the ability to go back for free, retrain in a new area and come out better, that to me looks like a win-win all the way across the board.
It is a win for everybody. And the key that we need to make sure is there to unlock that win-win is a very strong conversation between community colleges and their local labor market. So community colleges are the ones who know what jobs are leaving town and what jobs are coming to town, and being able to work out a partnership with industry to be able to promote those skills that are going to be needed, not the ones that were yesterday's skills. That's going to be the critical conversation to foster.
Mm-hmm. And that, as well as the ability to transfer from community college to a 4-year if you so desire.
Absolutely. We in fact, just today, we wrapped up work with a national task force on the transfer of credit. And it was a group of about 35 college presidents from around the country representing community colleges, 4 years, publics, and privates. You're going to see, as a result of that work and that report, a real emphasis on transfer because people, as you say, do often start out in community colleges. They need to know that job training is there for them. They need to know that those same courses will count toward a college degree. And the 4-year institutions need to create a stronger and better pipeline and better relationships with their local community colleges to make that happen.
Yeah, very, very good. Swapping horses yet again, covering a lot of territory today, my friend.
Plenty of horses out there on the plane today.
There are. Obviously, coronavirus has impacted finances, but we're headed to what some people are calling the enrollment cliff. Now, there are factors that could potentially mitigate this: changes in immigration, more international students, online programs that can reach out to more online students and international students. But how are universities dealing with, and what can they do to deal with potential drops in enrollment due to demographics?
There's undoubtedly a downward trend in the number of 18-year-olds in the country, period. So I think that there are a couple of strategies that institutions are putting in place, all of them good ones, and none of them mutually exclusive. So first, I think we have to remember that only about half of the eligible 18-year-olds do attend college out of high school. So one, is deepen the penetration of college going to high school graduates. And I think we can do that. We should do that. One of the things that we're learning in the pandemic is that low-income students are often discouraged by the high sticker price of college, by the complexity of applying to and getting into college. Those are things that are in our control. We can keep a lid on college costs. We can work with the government to provide more robust aid. We can communicate better with high schools and guidance counselors. We can make it easier for people to apply for financial aid. And all of those things need to be done. The state of Louisiana, for example, is now mandating to graduate from high school, you have to fill out a financial aid form.
Wow.
Even if you don't go, you've got to spend your 25 minutes filling out the FAFSA form to see if you'd be eligible for federal aid. That's one way to do it. And I think that will help. So deepening the penetration in the existing market is strategy number one. Strategy number two, I talked about graduation rates a while ago. A part of the financial problem for colleges and universities is their own dropout problem. So only 50%, so we've got 50% of 18-year-olds go on to college. 50% of those who go on to college finish. So if you and I were running a college, we could look at the 50% of people who leave and say, we could solve a lot of our financial problem by just keeping them in school. So do a better job with persistence. That's another good strategy. Strategy three, which I think is the big one, and we've kind of bumped into it in our conversation, is that there are a ton of Americans who don't fit into that 18 to 22-year-old profile who need and want higher education. There are 38 million Americans who have some college and no degree. They have that expensive college experience that you were talking about a while ago. Let's go back to them. Let's say, hey, we got a deal for you. Come on back, whether it's online or in person, and we're going to help you do what you wanted to do. You signed up for college not because you wanted to get 2 years and go. You signed up for college because you wanted a degree. So come on back. We're going to help you reach that dream.
Which brings us back to part of the conversation earlier about the counseling and the mental health and the support services that students nowadays need far more than, quote, we did, when we still were young and had hair.
When we were young, when we had hair, and we could just kind of stumble our way through, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's let's if I could poke one more time at this issue of persistence,
please,
and the students who drop out. When I was a college president, we scratched at the surface of that, and we found that the people who dropped out of college were those who didn't have a strong personal connection with, and then fill in the blank, a faculty member, a coach, a mentor, a tutor, somebody in the university who they thought was looking out for them. And so mental health sometimes looks like a capital M and a capital H and is a psychology center somewhere. No, mental health starts in just the interpersonal relationships that show caring, support, the ability to listen. And so we need to make sure that everybody who works in our colleges and universities is prepared to play that role to a certain extent.
Wonderfully said. One of the most impactful statements I ever heard was my first accreditation visit, and it was at a high school. And the principal said, and this was his mantra for all his teachers, he says, kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
That's right. That's right. For all of us who've been locked in front of Netflix and Amazon Prime and all of the others, The Queen's Gambit is one of the shows of the pandemic. And let's remember, who's the person who got her into chess? It was the janitor, right? It was in that basement around a chessboard. We've all had an experience like that, and we can't take it for granted. We have to help build those.
Yes, so important. We're coming up to the end of our time, and it just seems like it has flown by. New regulations coming down the pipe, a new Neg Reg?
I think Neg Reg and a reauthorization of HEA fit into the same category. Really, really big things to do, But I think over the next 2 to 2.5 years, we're gonna see a lot going on at the next level down. So rather than take a big bite in a Neg Reg or a big bite in an HEA reauthorization, I think we're going to see changes in gainful employment. We haven't talked about Title IX. Title IX regulations will come up, and there will likely be some kind of negotiation around new Title IX regulation. But I think we're going to see pieces of the puzzle coming together for the next couple of years.
I think you're right. So 3 takeaways for university presidents.
Number 1 is the pandemic has demonstrated the importance of in-person personal attention. College presidents need to remember that when people come back. There is a reason students want to come back to campus, and it's not just to be able to sit in a classroom. So we need to prioritize the non-classroom experience for all students. Number 2, the calls for social justice that have been amplified over the last year and a half need to remain front and center. If we really are going to have a diverse society and a diverse functioning democracy, our colleges have to be the places where we create the muscle to be able to deal with diversity. So let's double down on that. And number 3 is, I started with personalization. I also think that we have learned that there are some things that you can do and sometimes better using technology. And so I think we've kind of broken some of the old shibboleths against using technology in higher education. It doesn't ruin the world. We've gotten through this, and we're going to continue to. So those are my 3.
Oh, great. Thank you. I was shocked at how much, and I shouldn't have been shocked, but I was, at how much faculty really pulled together to move things online.
They sure did. They sure did.
We always talk about the resistance to change with faculty, but the faculty were right at the front lines, and they were the ones taking the bull by the horns and doing it.
They sure were. California State University, hundreds of thousands of classes, literally overnight, moved over onto online. That's a real testament to the professionalism of our crew. Another face for the heroes page. That's it.
So, Ted, what's next for you?
You know, I have never been more excited about the prospects for American higher education. I think we've all suffered a lot. My heart goes out to the families who have lost loved ones. President Biden's empty chair at the table image is quite real. I think, on the other hand, as I mentioned, the coronavirus has shown us a little bit about ourselves that we need to carry forward, about our resilience, about our courage, about our compassion, about the grace that we're willing to extend to others. And I know that there's a lot on the other side of that equation, but I think for me, I'm focused there. I think that higher education is focused there. I couldn't be happier about what we're seeing in the turn of administrations, the vaccines being spread, and the opportunity for us to take what we've learned and build a better America and a better higher education system.
Amen, brother. Ted, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. We could go on for days, and maybe we'll have a chance to do another one of these, but I really appreciate the opportunity.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, sir.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks for listening this week. And a special thank you to this week's special guest, Dr. Ted Mitchell, and for his sharing his thoughts on what's coming down the pike from the Biden administration that university presidents should be focusing on. I also want to give a special shout out to our sponsor, Perdea Education. Visit PerdeaEducation.com to learn how they can help grow your online student enrollment through a performance-based model with no risk or long-term contracts to your institution. Our next guest is Rob Hartman, Chief Financial Officer for Columbia International University. We've had Rob on the show a couple of times before. He's one of those top-notch CFOs who knows finance and the business of education, and he will join us to talk about how his institution has made lemonade out of the lemons that COVID dealt them.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.